Welcome to Captain Forest podcast Hero's Voice. Captain Forest is an international movement for a plastic-free, waste-free and permaculture world.
Hello, welcome to Hero's Voice by Captain Forest. Today we are happy to welcome Piotr Barczak, who is with us from Brussels. Piotr is an advisor at the International Council for Circular Economy. As Africa continues to experience rapid economic growth, urbanization and industrialization, waste management has become a pressing issue with significant environmental and health impacts. The lack of proper infrastructure and legislation to manage industrial, electronic and municipal waste is leading to the contamination of land and water sources, posing a threat to human and animal populations and natural ecosystems. While waste management in Africa seems challenging, in reality, by taking two main actions, African countries can solve a large part of their waste mismanagement: separating and treating organic waste through composting, and establishing a comprehensive framework, including national circular economy roadmaps. Piotr Barczak is here with us today to speak about waste management challenges and opportunities in Africa. Hi Piotr, nice to have you with us today. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello Lamiaa and hello everyone. My name is Piotr Barczak and I am a Circular Economy Program Manager at the African Circular Economy Network Foundation. I have been working at the European Environmental Bureau for the last 10 years. Now I joined the ACEN Foundation, but I have quite a lot of experience in policies, waste and circular economy policies that we were advocating for here at the European level within our organization, which is a network of NGOs all over Europe. Yes, and I was following the Waste Framework Directive and trying to make it as ambitious as possible, Packaging Directive and different waste-related directives.
Okay, so can you share important waste management figures in Africa?
Yes, so regarding data and figures for waste management in Africa, we have to take them with a pinch of salt because there is no consistent and covering the full spectrum of waste system that can gather all this important data. Data are important, because they help especially authorities, both at national level and at the city level, to make good decisions. But we also cannot fall in the trap of thinking that when there is no data, we should not act because we don't know yet. We should act already. There are some rough figures that we know for sure, like the composition of the municipal waste bin, which is around 70% of the bin is bio-waste. And that is very clear. That is, you can have it, you can see it everywhere, basically on the continent. So much bio-waste is there because it's heavy. So this is probably the first stream to address. Then there is the rest, which is very often packaging that should be covered by EPR and some hazardous oil electronics as well. But overall, yes, also what is maybe a highlight regarding the data is that the waste generation is on the rise. Of course, because of population, very rapid growth in Africa, unlike all other continents where actually we see stagnation or even decrease of population. So Africa is growing, especially also in cities. Africa is urbanizing itself very much. In future, we will see that the major cities in the world, the biggest one, will be in Africa. 13 out of 20 cities, mega cities, the biggest cities will be in Africa, with, for example, Kinshasa with 35 million people. These are crazy amounts. And in cities especially, the waste management poses quite a lot of challenges and troubles. Also everywhere, also it's not that the only cities should be covered with waste management, also rural areas, but there are different challenges. So overall, it's difficult to get quality data covering full spectrum and very consistent across the continent. But yes, the continent has to make every country, also the African Union, must take all the steps in order to get those data because they help to take informed decisions.
Okay, so in Africa we have a growing population, and so we can expect increasing the waste in the future. So we need to act. We need to act now, even though we don't have data. It shouldn't be something that prevents us from acting. So can you tell us what are the main leading cause of mismanagement of waste in Africa?
It's the leading causes of mismanagement of waste in Africa is lack of legislation, which results in lack of investments and infrastructure. And this results also in the society, the consumers that cannot properly dispose of their waste. They are not given even the opportunity. So it's not, as I would like to say here, that in reply to your questions, many of the experts would say it's lack of awareness. I want to argue this. This is not lack of awareness, because the first and foremost problem is lack of infrastructure. We cannot count that millions of people will suddenly follow the best in class environmental awareness, consciousness, and I don't know, maybe zero waste even, if they are not even given the tools to do this. They are not given the incentives. And how to nudge those incentives is through legislation that will require the producers who put on the market and therefore get economic also benefits out of that. The producers have to take also care of that, they have to ensure that the proper infrastructure for collection is there, separate collection, because we can speak about circular economy only if there is a separate collection of waste. Commingled collection or mixed collections is not in line with circular economy. So yes, really, it's about lack of legislation. Few countries are making some steps, but either it's too slow, or it's not consistent, or it's not ambitious enough.
Okay, so I think there are different categories of waste, and today we are going to focus on hazardous waste, industrial waste, and municipal solid waste. But can you give very briefly an overview of the categories so that we all agree on the definitions?
Okay, hazardous waste, as you mentioned. So this is hazardous waste that is very often coming from industrial activities, economic activities, but it also exists in municipal waste. So this division that you mentioned overlaps slightly between each other. But yes, we can, in terms of treatment, we can divide it, because hazardous waste requires specific treatment. It very rarely has economic value. Actually, it has a negative value. Industrial waste can be clean, can be also hazardous, but can also be clean. You know, the scraps of textiles or scraps of paper or scraps of agriculture production, which is also could be considered industrial waste because it's coming from production, can be clean, totally clean. But here, the trick is to group it all the time. Never mix it with another types of hazardous waste, for example, because then we lose all the value. If we group into the streams the industrial waste, cement after construction, and demolition waste, or organic material during processing of food, or paper scraps, if we group all of this in a correct way, then we have very clean streams that are much easier to handle than municipal waste stream. Because why now I go to municipal waste stream? Municipal waste streams means from households. So every one of us produces municipal waste stream. We have to remember that within all the waste that is generated in a country, about 10%, maybe 15% is municipal solid waste. So it's the waste that we produce as consumers at homes. The rest is really industrial, mining, also waste, because the construction and demolition, because it's the heaviest. But it is the municipal waste that is most difficult, because already within those 10 or 15% of waste, you have so many fractions. You have cans, so metals, you have electronics, you have some plastics, and you have a lot of organic waste. And you may also have paper waste and some electronics, or even some hazardous waste. So this is the most difficult to handle, but nevertheless, it does have a value. That's why so many countries in Europe, with the European Commission itself, is driving this within the municipal solid waste to extract as much value as possible in material terms, not in energy, because that's another story. But burning waste even if generating some energy, it is not sustainable and it is not in line with circular economy.
Okay, so just for a question for the industrial waste, so you mentioned a lack of regulation. So can you give examples of a regulation that could protect industrial waste in Africa?
Yes, well, this is difficult because if the policy making is not so developed and especially enforcement is not, so implementation is not really working, then it's hard to say that, yeah, a single piece of legislation will solve the issue. But in Europe, there is the Industrial Emissions Directive, which obliges all the industries to just follow the rules and regulations. Otherwise, they will be punished heavily. Not only the economic operators, so the industries, but also the responsible authorities that did all the necessary steps to prevent pollution to happen. So I would love that, yes, the African governments independently, like individually within their territories, implement something in kind of a industrial emissions regulation. Circular economy policies also are in line with industrial emissions directives. They are also trying to reduce the environmental pollution that industries can cause, either to water or to air, or also waste. Waste is also a type of emission, in fact, in material emission. But we know that within circular economy, so within keeping the value of separated materials, we can not only address pollution, but actually get the value, get materials and create jobs out of that. So this is economic value. So that's why here we speak not only about environmental protection, which is the main objective of the industrial emissions directives and regulations, but we also speak about the economic development of countries that will implement such policies. EPR for industrial waste.
EPR for industrial waste.
Yeah, it would be a great concept. So far, EPR mostly applies.
Electronic waste, maybe.
Sorry?
Electronic waste, maybe.
Okay, electronic, yeah. Okay. Yes, yeah, EPR, so Extended Producer Responsibility Policy Scheme System, is one of the tools to effectively implement so-called polluter pays principle. So whenever a polluter, be it industry or be it also consumer that dispose their waste in a wrong way, for example, into the river, they will somehow cover the costs of the pollution. So here it means that the producer is upfront paying some amount of money in order to manage the environmental damage, even risk that it can bring, but also waste management. So for example, in packaging and in electronics, it exists, yes, very well. In Europe, that every product, new product or packaging or electronic product, when it's put on the market, it also has some additional fee that is supposed to cover the collection and then treatment of this product. It is not, unfortunately, it is not performing well enough because it does not take into account all of the indicators, such as the extraction of materials during the production of those. So when we have plastic, we need oil. So is oil extraction included in the environmental costs of EPR or of the product within the EPR? No, unfortunately. So you see, we same for electronics, when we know that electronics contain a lot of precious materials that are digged in Africa as well. And they pose a lot of environmental and social burdens, can be translated to costs, but it's also difficult to translate social damage, So I'm just saying that, yes, EPR is one of the tools to upgrade the performance of producers so that they put on the market better products, materials that are sourced much more sustainably. But it's not the only solution. EPR is only one of the policies in the whole mix of different policies. One of the policies must be also banning. Certain activities have to be banned. Polluting industries have to be banned. We have also, for example, just asbestos. Asbestos in construction. It is banned. We are not putting a very high EPR on it anymore. We are just banning it because it's not welcomed in the society, in the environment, and in the economy anymore. So that we have to have this approach that whatever is very harmful for society, for health, environment, then it has to be banned. Simple as that. So EPR is another tool, and next to banning, and next to maybe some best-in-class performing labels, to award better producers.
Okay, thank you. Speaking about banning, so the transport of hazardous waste and secondhand goods from developed countries to African countries for disposable is a growing concern. So what do you think can be done to ban this type of practices?
Okay, yeah, here you touch a very interesting topic, because indeed sending waste from the global north, let's say from Europe, to the global south, let's say to Africa, is banned. It is banned by the Basel Convention. But indeed, there are activities happening every day, every week we read about them, that there is illegal shipment of waste to those countries. And it happens because of the prices difference. It's illegal, it's criminal activity. But then there's also a kind of a bit shady gray zone where companies are collecting secondhand goods in Europe, let's say textiles or electronics or cars, and they are sending them to Africa. And this is legal because they are secondhand goods. They are not waste, they are secondhand. Now, here we have a dilemma, of course, because on one hand, there are maybe schools in Africa that need electronic equipment. So we see this situation, but I don't agree with that, but I just want to say that it exists. And also for cars, we have this situation that in Europe, we are banning now, polluting cars, and by 2030, 35, we will even ban all the petrol and diesel cars production. So we can see that many more cars will go to Africa because they will be banned in Europe. So they will go to Africa.
It's already the case, I think.
It's already the case,
yeah,
indeed.
Yeah.
So it happens. But then the dilemma on the other side is, or like the wrong thing, is that we are sending less performing goods to Africa. We are sending polluting cars. We are sending low quality mobile phones or telephone or computers. And by the way, also, it also happens that in the container that is full of electronics, even 2/3, we had investigation done by Basel Action Network on that. They show that even 2/3 of the container is not usable anymore. It is labeled as reuse, secondhand, but it's not usable anymore because it has some blocks or it's damaged. Or there was a recent report by also Changing Markets Foundation about textiles sent to Kenya from Europe. A lot of those textiles are already damaged or dirty and you cannot wash it. Some of them are okay, but many of them are not. And here we see, because we spoke about EPR just before, here we see also the situation that the producers, they sell those items in Europe, so electronics, for example, and they pay EPR there. So the extended producer responsibility fee. So this fee is managed, is gathered, is budgeted somewhere in Europe, and it's supposed to cover the cost of collection and treatment at the end of life, at the waste stage. But what happens is a fraction of this waste is going to Africa, but the EPR budget never travels to Africa. So we see here it's a systemic problem that this money that should go to Africa to cover what is supposed to cover, so the last treatment of waste, it is not going there. So what we see, the African countries, Ghana very often receives a lot of waste, but also Senegal, recently from Spain, they receive all these products. Maybe those products will be useful for 2-3 months, maybe 6, maybe 1 year. But after that, they will have to be collected and treated. But there is no budget to treat it and collect it because the budget was remain in Europe. So this is something that I think some policymakers are aware of. Even myself, when I was at the World Circular Economy Forum a few months ago in Kigali, I posed this question And actually, I felt many people came to me that, yeah, this topic has to be discussed now because, yeah, this is a loophole, basically an illegal loophole where PROs means producer responsibility organizations that gather money in Europe are very untransparent about this money when it comes to sending to Africa. So yeah, thank you for this question. It's very, very important.
So it's like displacing a problem to another side of the planet, like out of sight, out of mind. But what can be done to ban this type of practices?
Okay, so as I said, I'm not sure it should be banned because there is a dilemma of somehow humanitarian or development aid. But maybe if you ask me personally, I do think, yes, it should be banned because by sending even secondhand in goodwill, but sending those items there, we are slowing down their own economic progress. We see many tailors in Africa are lost their jobs because there is so much of cheap second-hand textiles sent from Europe, but not only Europe, also from China, actually a lot, and Japan and the United States. So yeah, sending there is not good. So what should be? Yeah, it could be banned straight away from Europe, and that's why in Europe we have the revision of waste shipment regulation. And this revision is virtually banning all the waste shipments. But regarding secondhand, it is still not so clear. But I think with this knowledge and new reports coming out that secondhand sending is not really good, this revision will also try to close this loophole. But there is also something that receiving countries can do. For example, Rwanda didn't ban straight away. They could ban. Why not? They could ban and say no more secondhand products coming into our country. And it's easy because, I mean, it's easier because all those shipments come by in big loads or by plane or by trucks shipped. So you can track actually this the whole travel before it even starts, because maybe you can establish some kind of pre-consent, so pre-permission before even sending. But before that happens, the countries can also establish very high taxes. So whatever is sent to the country can have a very high, how we call it? The tax, import tax. So yeah, it will discourage the companies in Europe or US or Japan to send, because why to do it when they have to pay so much tax?
You explained a little bit earlier the challenges for solid waste management in Africa, but can you explain more in details what are the challenges for this type of waste, and also what are the countries who have been successful in managing municipal waste, municipal solid waste?
Yes. So I mentioned as challenges lack of legislation and infrastructure and political willingness. I would say this is really the main, because as regards to investments, there is money available. There is so many different programs from UN, from EU, European Union, Green Climate Fund, and so on. But the political willingness sometimes go into other direction, suggesting a wrong solution. For example, in Addis Ababa, a few years ago, they built an incinerator, a waste incinerator. This is totally not in line with climate strategies and not in line with circular economy. So these are challenges where, you know, the informed decision, there are no informed decisions, basically. There are some decisions, but they are lobbied by wrong consultants and by companies that have biased interests in that. I will not mention countries, but there are some specific European countries that have quite a lot of expertise in-house, and they try to export this expertise. They know that in Europe, they cannot already sell incineration because we are really going away from incineration, even if we still are locked in with a lot of incinerators heating our districts. But the political willingness is opposite. So there is very few new incinerators opened in Europe. So what those companies try to do, they try to go now to Africa. They try to find a new market to sell their advocacy, to sell their consultancy and technologies. So yeah, I would say this is the really major problem, is lack of awareness among policymakers and decision makers. I wouldn't say awareness of society, because this is something we will never achieve full 100%. And even in Europe, even in the countries that have been, educating about sorting and separation of waste for so long, like France, even, you see that there are people that still do not sort. And that's not, so I wouldn't put more emphasis on awareness, is on banning, on incentives, and also disincentives. So whenever people feel the pressure, they will receive a fine of not sorting correctly, they will feel the pressure. I know enough on the African continent, it's much difficult to do. You cannot really find people if they already have very little livelihoods. But on the contrary, you can give them incentives. For example, deposit return systems could be a solution where a container of beverage is returned directly to the shop or to the point of sale or some point of collection. And some countries are going this direction. So there is Rwanda, that is probably one of the most developed now in this case, in this direction. At least they have a political willingness. But it's also same in Ghana, even if we see still a lot of problems there, huge problems. But if there is a political willingness, for me, this is already an important step. And this step should be followed by civil society organizations, should monitor what the government is really doing. First, the government is committing to something, but then they have to do it. So there is importance of all the stakeholders to put pressure on the government. So civil society organizations, but also producers. It is in producers' interest to have circular economy in place. And speaking about producers, on the African continent, most of the large producers are not African, are European or American or Japanese. So they know very well what is EPR. They know very well what is extended producer responsibility, because they sell primary and produce in Europe or Japan or US. So they must not must not have a double standard, where one standard they have in Japan, but another standard they have in Africa. They should really apply the same standard. And they should basically, if there is no still mandatory framework for extended producer responsibility, they have to start with voluntary at least. But voluntary will also not work. So we need, in the end, we will need a regulatory for all.
And what can be done? Is it like the role of international organization to monitor these kind of things? Because if it cannot be done at the national level, because they have ties with these companies, what can be done?
Yes, it's difficult, because of course all the countries, they have their autonomy and they can choose what they want, and we cannot really intervene, and it's correct. Independency is a very important aspect of democracy and so on. But when it comes to environmental and human health protection, I think we should all be aligned. And therefore, African Union can have some leverage here. UN, UNDP, UNEP, whatever funding is given to national governments, it should be conditioned. You can get the funding provided you have the EPR policies in place. It will incentivize those governments to put the EPR in place, because otherwise they will not receive the funding. European Commission is also funding a lot of projects in Africa. And I think it's good that they also fund, bottom-up projects and some top-down also, but it would be really better if the funding is conditioned, so that to put pressure on governments to improve the environmental and health protection laws.
And is it possible, like, for example, to have, not to punish, but to put pressure on companies in Europe so that they don't have a double standard for Europe and African countries? Is it something that can be done?
Yeah, it can be done for sure. But I'm not sure for which tool to use it, apart from the civil society pressure. For example, there is a case recently about pesticides. There are some pesticides that have been banned in Europe because they are very harmful. They were banned to be used in Europe, but they were not banned to be produced and exported. And that was happening, a big case that European pesticides, harmful pesticides, were sent to Congo, Democratic Republic. And it causes a lot of harm to people. So in this case now, the civil society was very, very loud, very vocal about this, and it made the commission to apply, I don't remember, but it's called, I think, mirror rules, so that the same restriction that happens in Europe must happen also vis-a-vis the exports. So I would say it is possible, but it's I think the framework, policy framework, is not yet fit for that. We already have our policymakers and the inspection authorities, they already have a lot of work to control what is done in Europe. And then if we ask them to do to control what is exported, it is even more difficult. But I think we have to do this because we have the responsibility.
Okay. Just going back to the question of municipal solid waste. So what can African countries do to improve their municipal waste management?
Knowing that even 70% of the municipal solid waste bin is bio-waste, is organic waste, I would start with that. And this is also the easiest. Composting, anaerobic digestion, these are not natural processes that can happen. Nature was doing them for centuries and centuries, especially composting. So this can happen in a decentralized way, meaning that you don't need even huge, trucks, compacting trucks, because you cannot compact bio-waste because it's mainly water. So what you're doing, you just collect them in simple vehicles that can even be bicycles with remorque, with an attachment behind or in front. And then can be, and this will give jobs for collection in cities, to collect at least the biofraction, which is already at 70%. So if we do this, even counting some mistakes, we can maybe reach 50% of recycling of municipal solid waste within a few years, because we need to separately collect. And someone would say, yeah, it is possible maybe in the rural areas, but not in cities with high buildings, like in Rabat or somewhere, No, it is possible. Because we have examples, even in Europe, you have a city that is Milano, in Italy, and it is almost 2 million city with high sky buildings. And they managed to collect in a clean way, mandatory, separately, in high buildings as well, bio-waste. Now in Brussels, we also have mandatory separate collection of bio-waste, in so many other cities as well. And actually, I have to say that by end of this year, all European cities must separately collect bio-waste, because this is a rule stipulated by the Waste Framework Directive, Article 22, and this is mandatory. And so it is possible. What you can finance it from the waste fees, or also from the selling of clean compost that would replace the artificial fertilizers. Those fertilizers, their prices are growing now a lot because of the problem between the war in Ukraine. So we have also high rising prices of fertilizers. But why not to produce fertilizers on our own? We have all the tools. We know the technology. The nature do it itself. We just need to collect it separately. So I would start with this one. And second thing that I would really I think is very important is the EPR. We already spoke about it a lot, but EPR is the polluter pays principle rule. So producers selling products on the specific market on a territory, let's say of Nigeria or Congo or Ethiopia, have to pay this specific fee in order to collect in a separate way, in a sorted way, their waste and transform and send them to recycling, or even preferably to put on the market reusable containers. This is also, we know it everywhere. In all the even African countries, we know reusable glass bottles, and they are reusable for many times. They can be refilled, and that is also creating better economy, because it's more decentralized economy where refillers and cleaners can be all over the country rather than just in one centralized place. This is a very long topic. I love to speak about it, but just to summarize, bio-waste and EPR, I would say this is the first things I would suggest to the African governments.
Maybe glass recycling also?
Yes, I think glass recycling needs a lot of scale, and it would be possible, it would be useful, but today the situation is that there is there is much more plastic on the market than glass. A lot of countries left the glass because, yes, glass is more expensive, in fact, it's true, than plastic. But then from an environmental point of view, when glass is reused at least 7 times, I think,
no,
it is said, but
glass.
no, indeed, it can be infinitely recycled, but it can be reused up to 7 times. Oh no, even up to, for example, beers in Germany can be reused even 40 times. One bottle can be reused 40 times. So if this bottle is reused, then of course it has a lot of economic benefits. But because of the heavy lobbying of big corporations selling their products in Africa, there is much less glass available. There is just a lot of plastic. So the scale diminished. So as first, maybe we need to bring back the scale on the market, and in the meantime, develop recycling technology. So I agree with you.
So, and plastic is even another problem. We haven't talked about it, but it's I think it's also a big issue in Africa. Okay, and and for composting, it also means that we need somehow to educate people to separate their waste at home.
Yes, communication is important.
Not in their habits at all, I think, in Africa, to waste separation.
Yes, well, I think it's maybe much more sociological subject and question that maybe I cannot reply fully, but I still think that within the communities, even everywhere in Africa, we know that some items are useful and some others are not. So we already do our own pre-screening. That's why we don't throw away useful goods. Only if we explain the value of waste that is separately collected, we explain that the compost that is done thanks to the separate collection of bio-waste is really beneficial for your community, because you will have better yields, better production of agriculture. You will have bigger carrots and better, healthier salads. Then it is very easy to understand. And we have the same campaign here in Europe as well, regarding compost. Then, but apart from awareness, it is all about incentives and disincentives. If you punish people for doing wrong things, they will quickly learn. This is the fastest way to teach people. If you give them incentives, it's maybe even faster, because, for example, deposit return systems. If people will learn that by bringing their bottle back into the shop, they will get back their deposit that they paid before, for example, I don't know, 10 dirhams. So this is the incentive. So I say pull and push measures, incentives and disincentives. And we will manage this issue of awareness, because but lack of awareness must not, again, like with data, lack of awareness must not be a block, an obstacle to do anything, because once you start, people will do it. People will follow. If you put in place proper infrastructure incentives, people will follow. And that's my main message.
Amazing. Thank you. So any word of hope to conclude this interview?
Yes, for sure there is hope. I would see it from 2 sides, from bottom up and top down. From top down is that many more governments are now recognizing the need for circular economy. There is no future for their economy if it's not circular, because they will simply dump their economy and dump their society that will have impacts on health and environment. And we are dependent on environment. And so this is the top down. As long as there is a political willingness, other things will follow. Secondly, there is money and there is skills. There is lots of funding available in Africa, for Africa. For example, from the recent loss and damage, also, agreements at the COP, but many others also, many other funding as well. But it has to be well channeled into good investments, using the experts that stand up to the challenge that know the most ambitious solutions. And because of the fact that even 70% of municipal solid waste in Africa is organic waste, that is so much that even if we start with this, which is a low tech and low skill and low energy solution, we can already reach even half of the recycling, like 50% of recycling rate. So we have quick fixes, we have money, we have political willingness, not everywhere yet, but some countries do have this political willingness and they show the example, like Rwanda, for example. We have to change this. There is hope, but we need coordinated action.
So thank you, Piotr, for answering our questions. And thank you, everyone, for watching us. And see you soon for another episode.